Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us back in studio this sunny Tuesday afternoon. We'd like to welcome our first guest, as we usually do most weeks. Kick off with Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, glad you could join. The big news today, which is probably not news to most, was Bernie Sanders making his official announcement for his 2020 bid. And it just seems to be dominating the news cycle. I can't imagine any political pundit was surprised.
No one was surprised, except I do think there's a lot of questions as to whether he'll be as successful as he was the last time around and whether there's room for his message given the messages of a lot of the other candidates. The other wild card here is New Hampshire, because Bernie Sanders has a strong following in New Hampshire, and given the way the primaries are ordered, a win in New Hampshire could propel him further along than if New Hampshire wasn't one of the early states.
And let's take a look at that of course, myopic look at New Hampshire and Iowa being the first ones on the list. I mean, let's talk even about, first of all, CNN town halls being at 10 o'clock at night. Is that playing more towards the East Coast or the Iowa audience?
I think it's probably playing more to the Iowa audience, except that these town halls, the one last night was in New Hampshire. So, I think the candidates on CNN are trying to have their cake and eat it too. It's stunning to me that we're a year out and we're already doing these hour-long town halls with candidates with very well-known anchors, moderating them. So these are not sort of amateur hours or B-level debates early on. These are real events, and it demonstrates the enthusiasm that's likely going to accompany the entire primary season.
So I know you'd mentioned, we had watched it as well, Amy Klobuchar last night on CNN. How would you grade her performance?
I think she was very clear. She was very crisp. She comes across as very likable and authentic. It was clear, though, based on the substance of her answers, that she's trying to differentiate herself from the other candidates in the field by running a little bit more to the middle. And it's kind of amusing to me now what we consider the middle. I mean, the kinds of positions that she adopted by saying, for example, that Medicare for all is aspirational but not necessarily an achievable goal means that she's definitely not progressive. I think that we're probably trying to put these candidates into lanes that they don't necessarily have to go, but she's certainly trying to separate herself from the rest of the pack.
And so how do you think, a Midwesterner plays out? Let's talk about New Hampshire. Folks keep saying, as you said, how Sanders plays in New Hampshire. Of course, just south of the border, you have Elizabeth Warren. I mean, are those the ones that are really the ones to watch just by lieu of geographic proximity? Or do you think another one of the declared candidates could really make a strong showing?
Well, what's tricky is that with so many declared candidates, their strategies are going to involve not competing in all of the states and not competing against each other in all of the states. So it's not necessarily that the other candidates can't make a strong showing. The extent is whether they're trying to win or whether they want to just come in third to demonstrate that they haven't written the state off. So there are a lot of different chess pieces on the board, and the still wild card is Joe Biden. If you look at approval ratings in New Hampshire, he wins by far. So, that really, I think, shifts the dynamics as well if he makes a decision in the next month or so.
And let's talk a little bit again about that dynamic and who's playing into it. Politico had a piece today. They're questioning Kamala Harris's really commitment to New Hampshire. But as you said, really is a watch and see which candidates make which efforts in which initial primaries.
Yes, I mean, it would be silly for all of them to engage in the exact same strategy because that's a way to ensure that you only wind up with a couple of people standing after the first few races. We know that because California is now having an earlier primary than usual, that Kamala Harris can stay active and viable longer in the process, even if she's not as successful in New Hampshire or Iowa, assuming that she wins California. Now, it's a somewhat risky strategy. You might recall, or most people probably won't recall, in 2008, Rudy Giuliani pursued that strategy with Florida. Florida had an earlier primary than usual, and he sort of wrote off New Hampshire and Iowa and decided that he was going to put all of his eggs in the Florida basket. It didn't work out because even in those later states, momentum and early victories matter. So, I don't think that Kamala Harris can come in last in Iowa or New Hampshire and still win California, but she certainly doesn't have to win those early states.
So speaking of states, tack from 2020 to the recent news of 16 states suing the federal government over Trump's national emergency designation. Let's just talk about that group of 16, if you will. They're not all border states. Rhode Island's not on the list. How did this list, from what you see, how did those 16 come to be?
I mean, I think it's just a matter of which states were ready to go and had the paperwork ready, anticipating that this was going to happen. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't done a systematic analysis, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it has to do with the extent to which the people filing the paperwork had experience filing previous paperwork against this administration or against arms of this administration. It's clear that the overwhelming majority of Democrats and probably a majority of Republicans, although they might not admit it, do not think this is appropriate. And the Republicans are concerned because it sets a bad precedent. The Democrats, if they take back the White House, can then say that there's a national emergency and implement climate change restrictions. So this is one of those situations where you don't want to grant your party a lot of authority because once your party is out of power, you've granted the other party authority. And I think that's what we're seeing in terms of these states that are coming forward. They're a broad mix because this is actually not in anybody's best interest.
And speaking of those out of power, Andrew McCabe has been all over the news as of late, ex-FBI official, making a number of statements regarding the Trump administration. Talk with us about your take on what McCabe has been saying.
I mean, assuming that even a modicum of truth is associated with McCabe's statements, this is crazy. The idea that the Gang of Eight in the Senate, for example, were well aware of the fact that there were concerns and that the 25th Amendment might be invoked to deal with Donald Trump, and none of them said anything or raised any concerns, is pretty striking. The idea that they knew that he was being investigated and that there were concerns about not only collusion with Russia, but basically enabling a foreign power, also demonstrates sort of how far off normal course we are right now. And the other thing that's pretty interesting is that there have not been a lot of high-profile denials of McCabe's account. You don't have a lot of people coming forward saying, oh my gosh, yes, he's totally right, I remember it just that way. But you also don't have people coming forward saying that he's a partisan hack, who wouldn't ordinarily just consider him a partisan hack. He's a partisan hack who's making stuff up. And so I think this should be quite concerning to the administration because what he's recounting is also probably information that Bob Mueller has gotten from speaking to people over the course of the last year and a half.
Okay, so finally, Mueller Watch 2019. Here we are on Tuesday. I think we've run down the litany of what I want to talk about today. What are we keeping an eye on the week ahead?
I don't even know anymore. As far as this investigation is concerned, I don't know. I don't know when we're going to know anything. We do know now, though, that Rod Rosenstein is officially leaving the Justice Department. There was a lot of speculation that he was going to leave when the investigation was finished. Now, obviously, his position changed, and he was no longer pivotal to conducting that investigation. But assuming that the timeline is somewhat accurate, we should assume that Mueller is going to be wrapping up shortly. But I feel like we've said that a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and even a year ago.
So the things to watch, Mueller, and of course, if Joe Biden decides to toss his hat in the ring. As always, Jennifer Lawless, appreciate your taking the time to Skype into us up here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll talk next week.
Okay, see you next week.
Okay, thanks. We're going to let Jennifer Lawless go, and we'll be right back here, a little more local, with Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.